Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Yusuf Aram. More than 3 months after Assad's fall, Syria has a new government and a temporary constitution. But its economy, it remains in ruins, crippled by years of mismanagement and sanctions. In a show of support, the EU and other donors have pledged nearly $6 billion in aid to Syria and the wider region. But can the new leadership in Damascus seize this moment to stabilize the country? For the first time, Syrian officials attended the annual Brussels conference, where the EU committed $3 billion to support Syria's political transition after 13 years of war. Meanwhile, Turkish President Erdogan called on the EU to lift all sanctions on Syria. But tensions are rising. Syrian forces and Assad loyalists have clashed in recent weeks. The violence follows a recent deal between Damascus and the YPG, allowing the terror group to integrate into the state. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan urged Syria's government to recognize Kurdish rights, but warned that armed groups linked to terrorism must be excluded. For more, joining me now from Istanbul is Sinan Hatet. He's a senior research fellow on Syria at the Omran Center for Strategic Studies. From London, political analyst Jonathan Gittins-Mazer. And from Amman, Badr al-Mahdi, a professor at the German Jordanian University. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me now. It feels like everything's changing in Syria very, very quickly. I want to begin with the EU donor conference. I think it's very, very important. About $6 billion generated towards Syria and the wider region. Sinan, how important was this conference? Besides the money generated, the revenue generated towards Syria, is this a show of legitimacy and acceptance of the government in Damascus by the EU?
Yeah, thank you, Yusuf. Actually, this is not the first time that this conference happened. This is a yearly event in which the EU states gathered in order to decide their commitment to humanitarian aid and assistance to Syria. There is one slight change this year. An important one is that the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Syrian one actually present and deliver a speech. And this is a novelty that we haven't seen in the last 14 years. But the modalities remain the same. The EU will remain a very important and generous donor to Syria, and this year they are even more important in light of the retraction of the US. US used to be the highest and the bigger donors for Syria for years, but since the suspension of USAID operations, not only in Syria but across the globe, there is a lot of attention towards how the EU can fill the void. So that's very relevant, and this is why a lot of people were looking at what's happening in Brussels from up close. But still, it's the same that we've seen year over year, and the EU will remain will still be working with NGOs. And these NGOs will be, in exchange, of course, requested and required to work with the state. But the money will not directly go to the state. It will go most probably through NGOs.
Mm-hmm. Jonathan, what type of geopolitical but also financial risk appetite is there in the EU, maybe broadening out the West, the US as well? Are they really serious about wanting to invest and stabilize Syria once again?
I think from the EU perspective, there's no doubt that this is Syria. They take the Syrian issue very seriously, and it's an important one. Not least when you look at the largest donors like Germany and their relationship with Syria and the question of migrants there. But I think we also live in a dramatically transformed Trump world, and when we ask ourselves, how does the donor conference fit into an America First view, the U.S. reluctance to engage with the Syrian regime, some of the reactions to recent violence there? I'm not entirely sure that we have a full picture of what's next for Syria geopolitically. And this gives scope for other regional divisions, not least with the recent Israeli airstrikes.
Badr, $6 billion sounds like a lot of money, but I mean, when you look at Syria, Syria needs everything. If you had to prioritize how that money should be earmarked, what would be your priorities?
Absolutely. The infrastructure actually in Syria is very important when we talk about the education, health system. We talk about modernizing the administration there in Syria. We talk about transportation. We talk about roads. Everything actually the new Syria needs. Almost you are building a state from scratch. This is the problem of Syria, which been under the criminal regime actually for years and years, where the regime did not do anything really to modernize the state or to at least let the people work in building their state. So you need to build the state from the beginning. You need money actually to help those people who are in the government right now, even those who are in the NGOs actually. They need the communication, the channels with the new government actually to build what's really required by the Syrian people. And the Syrian people are in hurry actually to see something been changed in the ground, and this is the problem. And the world is not really also giving the breath for the new government or even the Syrians themselves. They are in hurry. They want to see the changes in the ground.
Definitely monumental task building a state from scratch. But while they're trying to build, they're also under attack. A lot of tensions on the border. Sinan, a lot of attacks from Israel coming on the western front of Syria. How destabilizing is this? What's causing this, and how could this be solved?
Let me start with the second part of your question. It can only be solved by curbing down Israel and having a regional response to bring back Netanyahu to regional security infrastructure discussion. The way that the Netanyahu government is not only behaving in Gaza but also in Syria is just bringing the region to a boiling point. What could we imagine would be the result of intensification of attacks in Syria, and if the current government, caretaker government, fails to succeed? It will be even more chaos that Netanyahu, neither Israel, can control or manage. This is not a small country. It is a country that has been devastated over the last 14 years. It is a host of a large population that has nothing to lose. What Israel is trying to achieve is to bring a Sharia government into a humiliating peace, quote unquote, agreement with Israel, which the Syrian public will ultimately reject. Syria hasn't been a source of security threat to Israel in the last years. It doesn't have to be one in the next few years or decades to come. This is highly in the hands of the Israeli government and how they recognize the choice of the Syrian people. Without that, chaos will be much more difficult to deal with.
Jonathan, there's also been tension on the Lebanon border between Hezbollah and the new Syrian government. How are you seeing that tension bubbling up? Is that very destabilizing? Is that something that can be solved quickly between Lebanon and Syria? Or is that something that HTS and Hezbollah need to talk about directly?
I mean, I think it's unrealistic to think that the legacies of the Syrian civil war and conflict will disappear overnight. And I think that legacy is further kind of antagonized by the shifting power balance in the region, such that we see kind of Iran and associated organizations very much on the back foot, given kind of what's happened both in Syria and elsewhere in the region. And there will be a degree of rebalancing in terms of those relationships. I think we're really seeing, though, a wider transition overall in terms of global politics, regional politics, and the balance is then on the ground. And I cannot imagine that that will be a quick fix, given that while all three of those issues are interrelated, they're also dynamic. Mm-hmm. And you're asking global politics to immediately link up with local politics. And I think that's a very complicated problem set.
Tall ask as well. The remnants of the civil war, I like that. And part of the remnants of the civil war, Iran, Badr, it's perceived that they're completely pushed out, but obviously there are remnants of Iran, Shiite-backed militia, Hezbollah still in Syria. How detrimental is this to stability? Can Iran play a spoiler role?
As you know, that maybe I can consider Iran the bigger loser, actually, of what happened in Syria, and Iran approach is not anymore actually there. Almost, we can argue that more than 80% of the Iranian approach, whether the nationalist or the sectarian approach, in the not in the Middle East, but at least in the Levant, when we talk about Lebanon and Syria, it's almost has been collapsed. So Iran, it will not surround easily for that. They will keep doing their job actually through Hezbollah and through what left from Hezbollah, and they are anticipating the situation right now in Iraq, and they are trying actually like a campaigning inside Iraq against the new Syrian government, and they will also they use the minorities in Syria itself, like the Alawi, to actually attack the new approach of the Syrian government, and they will try, but absolutely Iran, it has to be blocked by the, let's say, regional power here in the region, or Arab with the regional power, for not doing what Iran is planning to do. But absolutely, Iran, it will not surround easily, and they will try actually to do what is necessary for them to do, where they see the new government, the new state of Syria actually working against their agenda in the region.
Sinan, recently it looks like the Syrian government has been signing agreements with non-state actors inside of Syria, bringing some harmony, or at least some resemblance of harmony inside the country. I think one of the most important ones was with the Syrian Democratic Forces, made up generally of the YPG, a group that's the Syrian arm of the PKK, a group that causes problems for Turkey. Now, when we look at the agreement, it's vague, it's very general, a lot of generalizations. How do you see that agreement playing out in the future? Can it be implemented? Will the YPG be a concern for Turkey, or will Ahmed al-Shara be able to contain them and at least bring them to a state that is not posing a national security threat for Turkey?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think a better word to describe what happened is rather a framework of intent rather than really an agreement. As you very well said, these are very generic terms that needs to be translated into executions, into actionable items. And I believe that it will be built over time. It's going to take, the transition will be not an easy one. But the most important achievement, it has diluted the sense of security threat perceived by the local population and the local constituency of the SDF, which was the reason why they were in the first place tolerating what is perceived by many of them as extreme actors. So this will open up a new dialogue between the government, between local societies and communities. And this will create a more healthy civil military relationship, including local communities with SDF, including communities in Syria, in the rest of Syria, and the caretaker government. So I believe that this is a very important step in the right direction. Now we also have to look at how regional actors will help the needle move in the right direction. We have to look at the Barzani role. We have to look also at Turkey role and how they can help ease some of this friction, and how a serious DDR operation should be taking place while maintaining a healthy partnership format for Kurds in general to have a strong participative role in the future of Syria.
Jonathan, you mentioned Trump in your previous answer. The U.S. has been relatively quiet compared to the EU on Syria. What steps are you expecting from Washington? Will Trump complete the withdrawal that from Syria that he started back in 2019? Are you expecting any type of big aid from the United States? I mean, we're seeing a lot of dodging of the American budget. So will they be generous vis-a-vis Syria, or will Syria feel that budget cut as well?
I think we can see the framework with the SDF very much as an attempt to indicate to Washington the serious attempts of the new Syrian regime to normalize elements of the relationship, or at least to appear to be less threatening. We know the Secretary of State, Rubio, has serious doubts about the regime, about its background, about its relationships to HTS. But I think also it's just a basic fact of current Washington thinking that Syria isn't really on their map, per se, only insofar as it's a bargaining chip for finding this peace deal in Ukraine and normalizing some form of relationship with Russia and trying to break a Russian-Chinese relationship. So I think we can also see the framework between the regime and the SDF as being an attempt, a recognition on the part of PYD and others that the Americans really aren't likely to be there for much longer.
Badr, there's been a lot of regional discussions and meetings, especially regarding the future of ISIS and how regional actors can contain ISIS. One of them was in Jordan. I believe in Turkey as well, there's been some dialogue. How do you see regional countries coming together on counterterrorism, especially in Syria, maybe in Iraq as well if needed? Do you see the region cooperating more going forward now that the Syrian civil war has ended?
Yes, I think so. As you mentioned, there was a meeting here in Amman where actually Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, as well Iraq, actually they were participating in this conference or a meeting. Yes, ISIS, it has to be encountered actually by the regional power. Is not anymore encountering ISIS will be actually encountered by one militias, like what happened during the last 14 years when United States of America and some of European countries, they backed up SDF actually to encounter ISIS in Syria. Right now, it is a regional approach where ISIS has to be encountered by those countries, and I think the cooperation is in the highest level right now. I know that some of those countries, especially Iraq, who attended the meeting, they do have different agenda, but Jordan, Syria, and Turkey, as well as some other Arab countries, especially from the Gulf, they do have in their agenda actually really so a sense of cooperation to encounter ISIS and try to block it from spreading in Syria or in the region.
Sina, I want to ask you about Turkey. Now, Turkey has been very active in Syria, especially since Ahmed al-Shara came to power. There's been a lot of visits. Erdogan has not visited yet, but it looks like that's being set up. There's been talk about rebuilding the airport. There's been talk of a military base. Now that Syria is settled down, what steps are you expecting from Turkey going forward? I mean, what type of military role will it play? What type of governance assistance will it give? What type of rebuilding effort will it take part in?
Yeah. So obviously, I think the first thing that came to mind is assistance and knowledge transfer in building infrastructure. Today, Syria, as Badr earlier said, today is in need of reconstruction at every level, in education and healthcare, and also in production, so whether it's manufacturing or in agriculture. So what we're looking for is a very beneficial for both partnership in reviving this key economic sectors, which is the basis of stability in Syria. This is actually one of the most important questions in the minds of the Syrian people. Of course, when it comes to security and stabilizing the security of the country, I believe that Turkey's role should be part of a larger regional approach in which all countries, including our southern neighbors in Jordan as well as in GCC, also reaching out to Egypt, should play a positive role in bringing back stability to Syria as an active player in the regional security infrastructure. And this is not only a bilateral discussion, it is a multilateral discussion that involves many other actors.
Jonathan, you're in London. Recently, the Turks and the Brits had a conversation on Syria as well. Is there room to cooperate between the two?
I mean, I would say this, speaking from London, I think the British role has really become an interesting one. It is a bridge between the EU and the US. It maintains a real kind of regional it's certainly within the wider Middle East, particularly in Levant. I think it maintains a kind of watching brief as the Americans start to retreat or concentrate on other sets of issues. I think there is a lot of possibility there. I think it's also driven, to be honest, by British domestic politics, where Starmer faces internal economic pressures, but his ratings are boosted every time he makes comments on foreign policy and is seen as an international leader. Mm-hmm. So I can absolutely imagine a scenario where, Anglo-Turkish relations, a wider role for the UK on an international stage in order to help broker some of these questions of sanctions, EU sanctions, US sanctions, can run through London to be achieved.
Badr, the GCC also seems very interested in Syria as well, and they seem to all be vying with each other for influence in Damascus. It looks like Qatar and the Saudis are a little ahead of the Emiratis and Bahrain, and when we widen it out, Egypt as well. But how do you see GCC countries and Egypt playing a role in Damascus going forward?
Actually, Saudi Arabia is heavily putting on efforts behind the new government and the new state in Syria for many reasons, actually, that the Saudis have in their mind. As you mentioned, that maybe Qatar will become the second after Saudi Arabia. Absolutely, there is some hesitation from, for example, United Arab Emirates is not really clear its position toward Syria, even they gave some statements toward the new government. Egypt also, they hesitate so far. They don't really want to see any Islamic roots regime in Syria because they're afraid of aspiration. Since the Egyptians, they were working a lot to eliminate, let's say, the Islamic background ruling elite from the mind of the Egyptians, and they don't want to see it again in Syria, and it could be spread over the Arab world. So, but I think what Saudi Arabia is doing, the most important thing with Turkey, with Jordan, and I think they are leading the forces here in the Middle East to let Syria capture its or the position that Syria needs, and I think it will help a lot when we talk about the Saudis' role as well as Turkey and Jordan.
Well, hopefully we'll see more positive steps going forward and less destabilization and tension with neighbors. Sinan, Jonathan, Badr, that's all the time we have. Thanks for a great conversation. And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Yusuf Aram. If you got any comments, please share them with us on X at Straight Talk TRT. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel where you could find more exclusive content. Until next time, take care and goodbye.